Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today I have a very exciting guest for you. Today I interview Mubin. Mubin is the CTO and co-founder of a company called Navi Medical Technologies. Mubin arrived in Australia as an international student to study a Masters of Biomedical Engineering. Like always, if you find this video useful, like, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me who you want me to interview next. So Mubin, first of all, welcome to my podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. I know you've been extremely busy. Now, throughout this podcast, I want everyone to get to know you a little bit. So I won't actually do a detailed introduction. And I'm hoping as part of this, we will get to know you a little bit better. So let's start off with Mubin. Who are you? Where did you study? What school did you go to? Where did you go to school? And start with that.
Yes. I'm going to first tell you that I'm not originally from Australia. I was an international
Okay.
student here. I did my master's degree. So I did my undergrad degree and everything before it back in Pakistan. So I'm from a city called Karachi, which is like the southern part of, it is situated in the southern part of Pakistan. And when I guess when I was young, my father is a doctor. He used to administer a big hospital in Karachi. I used to visit the hospital just because he was there and, to get to meet him. But at the same time, I would look at the hospitals. I would see so many issues with how the current system was run. And when I say issues, it was basically my dad explaining all the problems they had in their hospital. And they're like, if you had, better technology, if you had access to better resources, this could have been so much better. So that was sort of the seed that he planted within me that, if I want to go forward if I want to do something in the medical side, sort of follow the legacy that my father is leaving, like the medical legacy, I could, look into doing something like that. So that's how I sort of started thinking about the biomedical engineering pathway, which I'll talk about in a minute. But like I said, my high school was done in Karachi. After graduation from the high school, I think I went back forth a lot between my parents and my uncle, who's actually an engineer. He's a mechanical engineer. He works in Dubai. And we were trying to figure out that if I want to follow engineering, which was one of the things that I was interested in, how can I combine it with the medical side of things? And this is how I learned about biomedical engineering. And interestingly, the university that was actually the best university in our city was had sort of this biomedical engineering course starting. Well, they had already started it a few years ago, but it was relatively new compared to the other fields, like mechanical and electrical engineering. So it's sort of like all the stars aligned together for me to get into that field. And that's how I got into my undergrad. The university that I studied in Karachi is called NED, University of Engineering and Technology. I did a bachelor's of biomedical engineering there, and it was a 4 to 5 year program with the last bit had a 6 month placement. Now, the course itself was really, really geared towards research and development. Like they were trying to teach you some part of the
Yeah.
research, but a lot of the part of development. So there were a lot of opportunities for us to actually build things. And I'm happy to talk more about it later if we get to that. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Can I
but
just wind back a little
yes.
bit? So you got into sort of biomed in Karachi. Now, just tell me a little bit about that process of actually getting into university over in Karachi. So, just as a context, in Australia, we have these final year exams in year 12. Everyone has to get ranked on a score, and then they put in their first, second, and third preference. Now, in Australia, people think that if you don't get the marks that you need to get into university, it's kind of the end of the world. But in reality, there's other pathways. What's that process like over in Pakistan?
Yes, it depends. It actually depends on which university you're going, right? So there are a few top universities, few top engineering universities in Pakistan. The one that I went to is actually a semi-private or a semi-government funded university. And then there are others that are top, but they're all completely private. Now, the thing with the private universities is they mostly assess if you can get in based on a standard test that they do once you
Yeah.
graduate. They don't really care much about your high school scores. So you just need to have a minimum threshold like 50% if you can get in your high school and you could get into that. But this semi-government one, what it does, it does that test as well, but it doesn't really weight your assessment towards the test. What it does basically, it looks at the three courses that you did in your high school, physics, math, and chemistry, and then ranks all the candidates who passed the test with a 40% based
Yep.
on, those scores. And what actually ends up happening is that because they have like 18 to 19 disciplines that they offer, the top ones sort of get to pick from everything that's available. And as soon as,
Right.
the disciplines and their quotas gets filled, the ones that are, under them sort of gets less and less choices. So I was at a fairly good spot. I had pretty much access to every field, maybe once or twice that, like, it might have been the petroleum engineering or electronics engineering that I couldn't get.
Yep.
But the biomedical one, because it was relatively new, no one was going towards it, but I still
Right.
jumped towards it, and that's how it all happened. Yeah.
That's really interesting, actually. So no one, in terms of biomedical engineering, it was relatively new. You were saying incorrect. At how long? How many years was that around for?
I think for that particular university, it might have been in the industry for about 3 years, might have been three
Okay.
to 4 years from memory.
Yep.
There have been other universities that offered that course, but I don't think the university that I went to, NED, they didn't have it for longer than 3 years. Yeah.
If you in that system, if you don't get into the courses that you want to get into, is there still another way? Is there other avenues to get into those courses as well? So if you get into a similar course in a university, can you also transfer through to the kind of courses that you want to if you meet certain hurdles like grades and things like that?
Yes, so there are two particular pathways that you can use to actually get into a course that you couldn't get with your own merit. One is the self-finance pathway. So as I said, it's
Yeah.
a semi-government funded university, right? So we basically paid $100 a year for the tuition fee. It's because
Yeah.
the government funds it, right? Um,
Yeah.
but there was a self-finance pathway where if you pay like I think I net $4,000 a year. And because I'm comparing Pakistani currency to the Australian, it sounds
Yes.
cheap, but it's not actually cheap. If you pay like three to $4,000 a year, you get into the self-finance pathway, and the
Right.
self-finance pathway has its own sort of merit list. So obviously there'll be less people in that, so you might be at a higher level.
Right. Gotcha. So there's effectively two pools that you can apply for. You can go for the self-funded pathway, and because that pool's a little bit smaller, because it's actually quite an expensive pathway, there's a little bit less competition. But of course, like you were saying, it's quite expensive.
Yes, and the other one that I was going to talk about is actually if you get really good grades in your first year, you have the chance to jump over to another
Right.
discipline.
Perfect.
Yeah, but I think to do that, I think there needs to be some students that have actually left the other course, which happens pretty much in every
Right.
discipline. So there's
Yeah.
always an opportunity for you to jump because there's always dropouts.
Correct. That's a really interesting insight because sometimes, especially I know when I was younger as well, and in terms of grades, I didn't probably necessarily have the greatest grades, but I did get into a university. But at universities, towards certain areas, I actually really excelled as well. So there is also that opportunity in that system as well, and same especially in Australia as well. You can get in, get better grades, and like you were saying, there's always people that drop out, and people in those later years of high school don't necessarily know exactly what they want to do, and they kind of change what they're doing. So that's a great insight. So continuing on from that, so you've gotten into university, you've kind of picked a field based on sort of two equal and opposing forces. You've got engineering and you've got medicine on one side. What was it like in university in Karachi itself?
Yes. And I'll try to make it as relevant as possible to the people who are in Australia. I know this is
Yeah,
more of a Pakistani story, but I'll make sure that there is some
mate.
relevancy there.
And just to clear, we also go for international student. I'm hoping my audience appeals to international students as well. So make it as relevant as possible to international students as well. It's really important.
Yep. Okay. So, yeah, so I think your question was like, how was how was the field itself, combining
Yeah,
medicine and
absolutely.
sort of engineering, right? So the first few years that, or the first 2 years that I did, had a lot of prerequisite medical courses that we had to do. So a lot of courses
Yep.
like physiology, anatomy, biochemistry, all these courses that obviously I hadn't done before. I had done basic biology, but they wanted to sort of raise us up to a point that we were similar to medical students, or not exactly
Yep.
to their level, but at some level, so that we can understand how the bodily systems work. So that was our first and second year. And but they also had a lot of engineering courses so that you get an idea of basic electrical engineering, basic mechanical, and all that. I got to tell you one thing about biomedical engineering. Even though it has a big medicine component associated with it, the biomedical engineers, what I would like to call them, are like jack of all and sort of master of none. So you have to actually make yourself a
Yeah.
master of something, because they teach you pretty much everything in that field, like every sort of things from different, disciplines. Like you'd be learning courses from mechanical engineering, you'll have, engineering mechanics, strength of materials, fluid
Absolutely.
mechanics, thermodynamics, all that. But then at the same time, you'll be doing electrical engineering courses, you'll be doing software engineering courses. So there's a bunch of these courses that are sort of scattered, that
Yep.
you can take up. But the thing is that they're all basic courses. So if you want to make yourself really good at a certain discipline, like for example, I was really into electrical and software engineering. What I did
Yep.
was I took up more software engineering courses, and I did a lot of electrical engineering projects myself because I knew the basics. Now I can go out and apply it in the practical field. So just going back to your question, the great thing about the course itself was that we were now looking at the medical problems with a lens of engineering, right? So like I mentioned before, there are a lot of issues in hospitals that could be solved with engineering skills. But then how do you actually solve it? Like, the first step is to actually understand the problem, and then you see what skills are at your disposal that you can apply to solve it. So if you know mechanical engineering, software engineering, all these different disciplines, you may have a broader range of, or like a bigger basket to select from, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, that makes perfect sense. And I always one of the things that you're really harping on, and I always like to mention this to people as well. Say in Australia you study accounting and you only do accounting. If you've got experience from another field, it may give you another perspective on how to solve that problem specifically as well. So, for example, having that ability that you had for both engineering and medicine gave you, just like you were saying, it's a bigger
Okay,
remit
that cut
to
off.
be able
I don't know
to
if you can hear me.
actually solve problems better because you can attack it from both angles, and it will help you come to a more holistic answer, I would say, to a problem, and not just a one directional view on something.
Yeah.
The first couple of years, how did you find the work in those first couple of years? Did you find so stepping up from the university days, so the high school days to getting into the university days, did you find that challenge? Like, how long did it take you to adapt to the kind of the different standard that was there?
Yeah. So one of the earlier challenges I had was actually getting the basics of the biology sorted. Like as I said,
Yeah.
physiology and anatomy. Like they were great courses, like, but the issue was that because I just did basic biology, it took me a really long time to really get
Yeah.
used to the jargons, you get used to the bodily systems. There are so many, like even in your arm, there's so many bones that have different names. There are metacars, there, I can't even remember some of the names now, but you have radius and ulna, you have humerus. You need to remember all the names of the bones and everything. That's just one
Yeah.
example. But it was just getting used to how the people in medicine sort of adapt and learn these courses. So that was the first challenge. Um, the second challenge was that in the early years, because it was all theoretical, and the practical bit sort of came in a bit later in third and fourth years. I struggled to just figure out the purpose of the course, because it was like, oh yeah, I love learning about how the physiology work. I know about the basic electrical stuff, but what do I do with it? It's like I didn't know if you so you must have done some sort of calculus in your engineering
Absolutely.
degree, right? You,
Yep.
you read about all these differentials and integrals, and you're like, okay, I can solve an integral now. I can do double integration. I can understand differentials, but what do I do with it? and it's to the point when you start, applying them to physical problems, to physics, you're understanding, okay, the laws of motions had a lot of these integrations
Absolutely.
and differentials apply. It starts to make sense. It's sort of, I had that feeling and like, what am I going to do with it? So I tried sort of, chatting to a lot of my seniors and teachers to understand what was that. And one of the advice that I consistently got was that, yes, it's going to come in, but you shouldn't wait for it, right? So if you've gotten the theoretical knowledge, start applying it somewhere. So, and this is one of the advice that I'll give to some of the students, regardless international or local students, is that
Hmm.
when you're in the university, you, and if you're only focusing towards the theoretical, and if the course doesn't have the practical elements itself, you got to find ways to implement those practical elements. So, for example, in a year, let's say you have 2 semesters. Now, each semester has this small slot of holidays that are associated with it, right? So, if you have your February semester, you'll have January, February, and even December available for you to do something, right? If you have the one after, you'll have the July period and the June period to do stuff, right? So my advice to some of the students would be that in those slots, you don't waste those slots. You try to either find an internship in any industry, try to get some practical skills through those internships, or what you do is if you're not getting into internships, because I know that there aren't many internships out there, but there are too many students, what do you do is you go online and find DIY projects. So what I did basically was, and I was so interested in building electrical circuits, is that I went online, I wrote ECG DIY. So ECG is electrocardiogram. It's like a device that monitors heart's electrical activity. But there's so many DIY projects available online that you can just build your own. And I know that it's a DIY. It's like it has all the instructions in there, and you're basically following a template. But even then, even that's so helpful because when you start implementing it, you can't implement it 100% the way that they implement it. There's going to be so many gaps that you have to address as well. And then you start thinking about those gaps, and then you start researching those gaps, and then you learn something new. And then when you go on and actually build a circuit, you'll be like, oh, it's not working anymore. What should I do? And then you go out and try to solve that problem. So there are so many opportunities to learn through those. One example that I use for this particular one is that if you read a research paper, you know that the research papers are meant to be written in a way that someone can replicate that research. But when you actually read the
Yeah.
papers, you can't 100% replicate the research because so much assumed knowledge and there's so many gaps. So you have to make assumptions there or contact the author. So that sort of sends you on this rabbit hole of, finding out those answers. I think it's very similar to these DIY projects as well. No matter how good the YouTube videos are, no matter how good these blogs are, you are going to get stuck and you will have to, go out of your bubble and find that answer. And that's the part where you learn a lot. And next time you're building something, you'll be even quicker. So that's something I'll tell the students of today.
There's a lot to unpack in that, and that's some absolute great advice. So there's three key things that I've got written down here, which I'd love to discuss about what you were just saying. So the first thing is let's talk a little bit about one of those aspects of what you were saying. You came from an engineering, sort of you understand the engineering, you know what motors are, you know what fluid flow and biomechanics and all that sort of stuff is, but you're trying to learn the biology. So I sometimes say when you're taking on a new subject that you've never, it's like learning a new language. You need to, like you were saying, you need to learn the jar. What was your process in actually learning how to do that? How did you actually go about doing that? Because that's actually quite stressful when you don't even understand the basics of what someone's saying, and you do get embarrassed when you just ask stupid questions. Like if you start a new job and you don't understand the terminology, you do feel a bit you might feel a bit embarrassed or stupid about asking those. So what was your process around that? How did you actually get to learn that and get up to speed as quickly as you did?
In terms of biology, I'll divide that into two sections, the anatomy and the physiology. So anatomy is
Yeah,
basically understanding what different parts are in the body and what are their names, or what are their names that are labeled by scientists of the old. And then you have the physiology, which is just understanding the processes that are happening in the body. So for the anatomy, it's basically memorization. And
right.
memorization is hard, so you have to write down and remember things. But there are ways
How
online.
stressful was that?
It was quite stressful, but then there are ways to actually get better at remembering names. So sometimes there would be these trying to remember these words that you can just each alphabet of that word would sort of map to a particular bone of the arm, for example.
Right.
So, if you remember in trigonometry that you had that some people have curly brown hairs, they'll paint it black analogy, where
Yeah.
some means
Okay.
sine, P means perpendicular, H means hypotenuse, and you would know
Absolutely.
that sine is equal to, some people have perpendicular divided by hypotenuse. There are so
Yeah.
many ways to do that in anatomy as well. I can't remember anything from the top of my
That
head, but that's one of the things that actually helped me because if they're funny phrases, I could remember them, and the next time they come up, I'll be like, okay, it's radius ulna, it's humerus, and along those lines. So that's how I sort of tried to work towards the anatomical part. But for physiology, I think physiology was like the process for me to get better at physiology was to first write down all the jargons. So what would happen is that
Mhm.
when you read a book, the book that we were following was a book by a scientist called Sherwood. And when you read the book, when you read the paragraphs, the book was pretty good, but it would repeat the jargon again and again. So I would just try to note those jargons down. And I'm like, okay, if it's gonna come again, I'll exactly know what it means. And it's all the process stuff. So it's very easy to, follow through the process. They're gonna be talking about, okay, what's a cardiac cycle? How does the electrical current in the heart flows? It flows through the SNO, then it goes through the right atrium, then it goes through the muscles, the Purkinje fibers, all that. So those, if I knew all the jargons, if I knew what SNO was, what Purkinje fibers were, and if I know what they're talking about with the diagrams and everything, it would be much easier for me to understand the process. And the other thing that actually helped was you look at the book. Books are helpful, but at the same time, you can look at online resources. There are YouTube videos, so many YouTube videos available that would just dumb it down to, you know, to the level where you'd be like, okay, it makes sense.
Absolutely.
It's like ELI 5, like explain like I'm five, kind of thing you would find on YouTube. So that was sort of how I tackled it. I don't know if it's the best way to
That
do it, but that helped me.
no. That's a valid point. And again, to everyone listening, when you find a new challenge, you've got and I think the process, if I was to summarize some of that, you've kind of chunked down the work into specific components, and then you've tried to understand the components and then see how they all flow together. And you were saying right at the start as well, in that first phase, that it was actually quite stressful because you don't understand what's happening. But is it safe to say you just persisted through it? It's you set up a process and you just followed the process of how to actually learn to teach yourself. I actually interviewed someone, and they were telling me it took them about 12 months to go through the process of learning how to learn. And I think when you're starting a new challenge, what you're trying to say is you basically got to stay persistent to the problem that you're trying to solve, but you've got to do it in a way that you learn. And the best way to do that is just start doing something. And the process, what I see that you've done is you've just kind of chunked it down. You've learned the components. You've set it in such a way that it made it funny, and then you were able to remember it in such a way it sort of triggers a memory, and you were able to just stick to that until it just became second nature. Is that a good characterization of the way you did
That's right. And look, I'm no genius. I'm not a, prodigy kid or anything. But the way I sort of kept myself motivated and you're talking about persistence, the way it came through was through two things basically. One was basically the fact that I actually wanted to understand the biology so that I can,
right?
solve those problems that I had seen in the hospital way back. So that actually helped a lot. But the second one was I was just super competitive. I was like, I have my friends. We were all competing against each other. I'm
Yeah.
like, I want to get better grades than them. So that sort of kept
Well,
me motivated.
that's actually a key thing as well. Find a, and I guess you can do competitiveness in a healthy way and an unhealthy way as well. But find a peer group as well. I think that's a critical point. You say find a peer group that have similar qualities. The other thing that you've alluded to as well is and you were saying that you found the problems before you got into biomed. There was a passion there to actually solve a problem, and do you think that gave you the persistence to follow through? Just having that passion to actually be able to fix a problem, and that's kind of why you were doing it. You weren't doing it for you to get rich or to win awards or anything like that. You actually were trying to do it to solve a problem, but you're also in that peer group where you're kind of actually helping each other, being a little bit competitive. You want to beat your friends in the friendliest, healthiest way.
Yep.
I want to follow up with a second thing that you actually said, and I thought that was absolutely critical. And this is where everyone falls apart. One of the critical things that I always see people do is they study everything. They study the roots, they study the roots, they study the roots, but they don't pick the fruit. And what I mean by pick the fruit is you've got to actually practically apply that. And that key point that you were saying was during those breaks that you have at the end of university, or even, even if it's a weekend, look for those internships. I think that's quite key and important, because you really do. And this is for anything that anyone's studying. Theory is important, but you could have no theory and be able to apply something, and you'll get a lot further in life than the person who knows all the theory inside out. Those practical examples of actually having to apply for those internships. And some of those, even if you're not getting paid for them, get that experience. It's really worthwhile. And then the second thing that you said, and I can tell that you started your own business, because every single, business owner has told me this: do your own DIY projects. I've actually interviewed a doctor over at Monash Health, and he was telling me, I asked him the question, I said, what do you look for when you're hiring someone? He goes, if they've got no experience, I look for what projects are they working on? What sort of portfolio have they got? So those DIY projects that anybody can do, anyone can do those. They will really show that you stand out in front of people. Interestingly enough, when I got my first job, I had a DIY project that I actually presented in my interview, and that kind of got me across the line and beat the competition. So those are really, really, really key insights. So I could tell that you've come at your profession from a point of passion. You've seen a problem, you've seen an issue. Your dad's obviously given you a bit of encouragement to say, hey, there's a problem with the system right now. You've taken a choice to wanting to fix it, and then you found an avenue into that process to actually fix it. So I think that's really, really, really encouraging. So let's we'll go on a little bit more about your career. We'll fast track a little bit. So you've done your studies, you finished university. How did you, and then you obviously come over to Australia as an international student. How did that process happen? How did you apply for, why Melbourne University out of all places? How did that start?
Yes, so the thing with biomedical engineering in Karachi, and specifically with the course that I did, it had a lot of research and development aspects, as I was alluding to earlier, but there weren't any jobs out there that would actually use people with those skills, right? So what we were learning was really based on an international standard. Like they actually adapted it from, I think, one of the universities in the US, might have been MIT. They adopted a lot of those courses from there. But those courses were suitable if you're in MIT itself, or if you're in American market, and you have the industry actually hiring for those people. What the case in Karachi was, I don't think I know any research and development companies or any industries that are actually building medical devices, and I can see now why. But at that point, the only jobs available to you would be either you become a salesman, so you need like a product specialist. Right. So if you're learning about medical devices in a degree, you would know about it, and you can then use that knowledge to sell the device and teach people how to use it. So that was one avenue. The other one was servicing. So you could work as a hospital biomedical engineering in the hospital biomedical engineering department, and you can fix the machines there. So I mean, that attracts a lot of people as well, because, you're still going through the process of, troubleshooting, diagnosing the problem, and then coming up with a solution. But I don't think that was for me. That was for me. The third option was that you get into teaching. So teaching, obviously, it's just you teach what you learn. So what happened with me was that I was convinced that I don't want to stay here because I don't see growth in what I actually want to do. So I started looking for opportunities overseas. And in Australia,
was that scary?
It was. Did that scare
you going? Yeah, I was going to say, what was that? What's the feeling like? Because you're going to another country, and again, your English is perfect, but the way you learn English and the way you speak English in Australia is very different. That's one thing I speak to a lot of people for, and a lot of people who are very fluent in, I would say, correct English come to Australia and learn the way that we speak English. and find it very difficult. So what were the emotions behind all of that? How did you find that?
Yeah, it was quite challenging. I had a lot of challenges when I came here. There was a bit of a cultural gap, the language gap, and the
Yeah.
accent. Like I was used to the American and British accent, and the Australian accent was like totally out of the world for me. It took me a while to get used to it, and even now, sometimes I go to the northern side of Australia and I meet people I still struggle sometimes to understand. But I've gotten used to it. But anyways, just taking a step back. Yes, it was a challenging process, but like I said, I think for me it was sort of set in stone that I want to do something meaningful. I want to
Yeah.
impact people's life. And how can I impact it? I don't think it was by repairing machines or selling the product, but for me
Right.
it was by building it. So I was motivated to find a university overseas where I can do a master's degree and then use that to accelerate my career. And the way I sort of came across University of Melbourne was because of some of the great work that has been done here in the past 10 to 20 years, or actually even more, dating back to I think probably 70s, 80s, I don't remember. But I looked at the bionic ear, the bionic eye. Um, cool things really attracted me. As a young engineer,
Yeah.
I'm like the notion of actually building something like that really, really, really attracted me. And then, the cochlear implant that you have a company
Absolutely.
in Sydney that, sells cochlear implants. That sort of also came through, I think, through a professor at the University of Melbourne. So a lot of these inventions and a lot of these technologies that came through Australia sort of, attracted me towards that. I also considered going to the US, but I guess the reason that I didn't end up going to the US was because I found that the quality of life in Australia was way better
It's very
compared to
high. Yeah.
the crime
We're
rate.
very
And
lucky here.
yes, there are a lot of good things in Australia that
Well, we're
I
glad you're
don't.
here.
Yeah, thank you so much. But I think I got a bit spooked with when I was talking to some of my friends in the US who had already gone there.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's how I decided to come to Australia. Multiple reasons. Yeah.
That's very interesting and very brave of you to, and again, being of Asian descent, myself, leaving the family is actually a big thing. So leaving the family and going to another country where the language is, let's say, not really that English, is a big challenge. And how much time did it take you to sort of get used to that, to the cultural difference? Do you think it took about 6 months, a year to sort of adjust to the way we say "g'day" and "how are you"? And
I think it took me a couple of years to get used to all the
yeah,
jargon. I would say that I'm still not on top of it. Sometimes, like I said before, sometimes I
it's all
still
right.
get confused over things. Sometimes, so there are these cultural subtleties, like the nuances that when you're meeting someone. I'll give you an example, right? So in
Yeah,
in in Karachi, when you meet a friend after a very long time, the way you go about it is, you hug them first and then you shake
yeah,
hands. I found that with
right.
some of my colleagues here, if you meet them after a while, they'll shake your hand first and sorry, yeah, they'll shake your hand first and then they'll hug you. And what I would
Yep.
do, just subconsciously, I'll shake their hand, hug them, and then I'll put my hand again for it to shake. And I'm like, oops, sorry, gotta put it back. So these are these small things that I'm still, getting used to and sort of losing the muscle memory that I had from before. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, but it's still taking me time, and but I think it took me a couple of years to actually really get used to the accent and really understand what the teachers were talking about when I was, doing my degree.
And that's a challenge too, because it's not a cheap process to study at Melbourne Uni out of all places, as well as an international student. Um, but because I think you just talk to me a little bit about that, because that would have been really hard. You're paying a lot of money to study at Melbourne University. It's not cheap. We all know it's not cheap. But then the language is a little bit hard to understand. It's not necessarily the content; it's just the way it's expressed. How do you find the strength to kind of work through that, not just go back to Pakistan and I don't know, be a salesperson or fix machines? But it is actually I speak to a lot of migrants as well. My parent, I'm a first generation migrant here. My parents are, and they, when we came here, it's a very, very welcoming country. That's one thing. But we did struggle. I think I never spoke English when I first went to school as well, and not that I remember that, but my parents did say, you did take a bit of stress with that. But what was it like for you? What was that? How did you cope? How did you persist? How did you push through? What did you do? What were the things that you did every day?
Um, I think the main thing, obviously, aside from the passion to actually do good in my field and grow, one of the other things that sort of gave me the strength and kept me going was the fact that Melbourne is a very diverse place. It's very multicultural.
Yes,
You're
yes,
not alone here in this kind of situation, right? So when you come to Melbourne University, there's a bunch of international students that are in the same boat as you. So you make friends with them and you sort of see the challenges that you're facing and then see the challenges that they're facing, and then you sort of build that chemistry, and then it's like if you're trying to solve a problem alone, you'd feel very burdened. But if you have multiple people that are helping you and are in the same sort of boat, the burden sort of gets distributed, and it's pretty hard to explain. But it's like there's this Indian movie where this guy says a quote. They see this result. These three friends, and they two of them fail, and the third one sort of gets a pretty good grade. But then in the end, they say that it would have been so much better if you all failed, because then we'd be all in the same boat and we'd feel less
yeah,
bad about it. It's kind of like that when you have people surrounding you facing the same challenges. I think it's much easier to tackle them. So that
absolutely.
yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I was able to sort of move through that, and the diversity, like I said, and the multiculturalness here really helps.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. And I'll circle back to something you said earlier as well. You know how you had that peer group when you were in university and you were sort of competing and trying to, you're a bit competitive, you want to beat your friends and all that. It's a little bit like that. You found community in a group of people that share a similar share the similar issues, and then you kind of work through those problems together. And being Melbourne, of course, it's a very multicultural community that we have here. Everyone's quite welcoming. I felt very welcome coming to this country as well. So I think that whole being able to find community where you're struggling in life, to summarize that a little bit, try and find people who have similar sort of struggles and work with each other to kind of improve those situations that you're in. And if you keep at it and you keep persistent to it, you will get through that. Like that problem will get solved, and you'll have another problem to solve. And then follow that same process, find community, work with other people to get through that process. So I think that is a great absolute insight. Okay, guys. So I hope you got a lot of value out of that interview. Now, if you've got a job interview coming up or you're preparing for a job interview process, check out the link below. It's my free course on how to prepare for any job interviews. We go through the key things that knock people out all the time. Fashion and hygiene. What are the common questions you're likely to be asked? What questions do you need to prepare for? And critically, what do you do if you've started applying for jobs and you've got missed calls from recruiters? Now, those are screening calls and you have to pass those in order to get through the next stage. So if you want access to all of that, please check out the link below. Like always, best of luck with your career.